Hello everyone. Today I would like to talk about Carl Jung's concepts surrounding the anima and the animus. I find this very fascinating and I hope to dive into it in more detail in other videos. This will just be a very foundational, easy peasy, quick and dirty explanation of what the anima and animus is all about. If you are interested in other archetypes that you would like me to talk about and discuss, please leave your comments down below. All right, let's get into it. We're going to start out with some very basic thoughts about what anima and animus is. Carl Jung conceived of our personality or psyche as having various aspects. There's the hero, loving parent, there's the shadow, and there is also the anima or animus. When we are thinking about the anima and animus, it's very helpful to use a Yinyang symbol to explain it. This is partially because Jung's ideas were inspired by Eastern mysticism and because it's just an easy way to imagine it. So for those of you who are driving and can't look at anything that I might have on the screen, I would like you to imagine a yin-yang symbol. If you don't know what that looks like, you can just imagine a circle. The circle is divided in half. One half of the circle is black, one half of the circle is white. In the side that is black, there is a single white dot. In the side that is white, there is a single black dot. Now, what is this all about? The black side represents what is female or feminine. The white side represents what is male or masculine. And what are the dots? Well, the white dot within the black side that is female means that within every woman, there is an idea, subconscious or conscious, about what is masculine or not feminine. And we can also see in the white side, which represents masculinity or the masculine psyche, there's a black dot. And this black dot represents the subconscious ideas that a man might have about femininity or the female. Now, depending on your personality, experiences, and growth journey, your dot might be too big, too small, or just right. The names for these dots is anima and animus. Anima is the section of femininity or the subconscious conception of femininity that is found within the male psyche. The white dot is the animus. So that is the conception of masculinity or the masculine or what is maleness that is within every woman's psyche. Now, before we go any further, it's perhaps really helpful to look at some general concepts of yin-yang because, like I said, I do think this did impact Jung on some kind of level. So according to one source I found, Wang, yin and yang were initially just a way to describe natural phenomenon. So let's say you have a mountain, the sun's shining. The sun's only going to be touching one side of the mountain. The side of the mountain that is doused in sunlight is yang, male. And the part of the mountain that is hidden in shadow is yin. So there's a concept to a certain degree that yang is more about height, brightness, and usually the south side of a mountain. Whereas yin is referred to as closedness, like a closed door, darkness, and the south bank of a river or the north side of a mountain. So you might be thinking, oh, okay, these are very specific locations. And the answer is yes. But what is really fascinating is that if you think about it, when a sun passes over, let's say, a mountain, the sun is moving. So the mountain at one point will have yin on one side, yang on the other side. But as the day progresses, this will shift, possibly even in the opposite direction. So it is a very fascinating thing to note that even in this early conceptualization, this identification of yin and yang was by no means constant or stagnant. It could shift. Another interesting thing is that yang, that would be the masculine energy, was linked to movement, whereas yin was linked to rest. And another very important thing is that neither one was valued as being more important than another. They were both equally important and just a part of life. Now, according to the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica, yin became a symbol of earth, femaleness, darkness, passivity, and absorption. It is present in even numbers, in valleys and streams, and is represented by the tiger, the color orange, and a broken line. Yang is conceived of as heaven, maleness, light, activity, and penetration. It is present in odd numbers, in mountains, and is represented by the dragon, the color azure, and an unbroken line. I want you to just orange and blue. Is anyone seeing a connection? Is anyone thinking of something I may have mentioned before in another video about orange and blue, right? And so if we just let the symbology flow over us, we can see how some stories and tropes start resuscitating this concept. Now, some of them do it very well, and some of them, in my opinion, mishandle the tropes because they have only a very cursory understanding, perhaps, or the plot requires a kind of a break with the thematic values. But for me, I feel like just like music has a symphony, has a gorgeous through line, if the composer is a true master, they can follow certain melodic motifs and things while maintaining originality and creativity. Similarly, I believe really great writers are able to properly handle these themes and pass it through carefully so that not only is there consistency within their plot, their narrative, their character growth, etc., but there's also some fundamental consistency that's linked to great universal truths that appear to have been passed down to us over centuries. And I think there's something very beautiful about achieving this within your writing. It's kind of like an architect achieving the golden number or a musician achieving a certain tonal quality. So once again, the yin-yang concepts are very, very traditional, very ancient. We don't know where it really came from. But if we look at all of this from a more, unbiased or just a more relaxed perspective, we can definitely suggest that while men and women may be on a spectrum of gender experience, and while not everyone is going to conform to a general rule, there are some general psychological patterns that we can see everywhere. And once we really take out any kind of defensiveness within ourselves and just embrace who we are, we can tell ourselves, you know what, I am not the norm. I am a bit, I'm a bit of an oddball. Or we could say, you know what, yeah, I can really understand feeling this as a woman or as a man or whatever. So I do think it's very fascinating and very interesting to look at how the ancient Chinese came to conceive of yin and yang. But what does this have to do with the anima and the animus? Let's take a general look on the anima and the animus. So for men, there exists an anima, a feminine inner personality, and for women, an animus, a masculine inner personality. According to MacLeod, these archetypes are derived from the collective ideas of femininity and masculinity, but it is also formed from the individual's experiences with the opposite sex, usually starting with their parents. Okay, so your mom and your dad are really going to impact you. The anima and the animus exist in the unconscious, so you're not always going to be aware or thinking about what you're doing. And certainly there are quite a few people who float through life not questioning anything and just going through the motions. But for those who are a bit more contemplative, those people may have noticed that there are certain things or trends or patterns that they tend to do. And they might be wondering, why is this? Well, it might be due to your anima or your animus. So like the shadow, it's often involved in projection. Projection is how you view other people or how you put what you are expecting on other people. And so, for example, let's say a man sees a woman holding a baby. He's going to project onto her certain fundamental notions about femininity and nurturing. And this might actually lead to certain things happening, like love at first sight, stuff like that. And this is the same thing for women. When a woman sees a man behaving in a certain way and it fits within her subconscious ideals of what a man is, then this may lead to certain behavior or certain reactions. Now, Jung also acknowledged that these masculine traits, like autonomy, separateness, aggression, and the feminine traits, like nurturance, relatedness, and empathy, are not confined to one gender, and neither one is superior over the other. Okay? So there are going to be men who are atypical, and there are going to be women who are atypical. And just like the yin-yang conceptualization, you may shift from being typical to atypical and then back over the course of your life. So there are stress patterns that might affect your behavior and make you behave in a typical or atypical manner. In some ways, you might imagine that the dots within your side of the yin-yang, whatever that side might be, can increase or decrease depending on your situation, your mental health, your stress levels, everything else. So let's get into a bit more descriptions on the anima and the animus. Let's start with the anima. So this is a part of the male psyche that represents the feminine inner personality. It's linked to empathy, nurture, bonds, relatedness, social responsibility. And when this anima is not properly integrated into yourself, you will see men behaving a certain way. Okay, so these men might fall into just giving into their anima. So they'll become passive, bitchy, moody, doormats. They won't be able to innovate. They can't take risks, and they will they will definitely be more manipulative, masochistic, greedy, self-centered. To a certain degree, they might participate more in unhealthy hierarchies because women tend to really leverage social circles for power. And so a lot of men who are either giving into their anima and are totally feeding into this might end up abusing these kinds of networks and power structures to manipulate things in their favor. And this is because they feel largely incapable of actually dealing with anything themselves. They are lacking agency. They've to a certain degree have ceded a lot of their power or the will to do things in a certain sense. And so if you see men behaving in a group with group mentality or groupthink, this is probably a sign of stress within the male psyche. Probably. That's a bit of my theory. Okay, so that's the anima. Generally, the anima is going to really kind of lean toward more feminine traits if the man is feeding into the anima. Okay, but that is not always the case. There are some men who are afraid of their anima, so they repress their anima. And this is where you get over performance of masculinity. So you're going to have macho behavior. You're going to see men who are hyper aggressive, physically abusive, just careless. They're taking too many risks. You start talking about emotion or like sitting down watching a chick flick and it's like, oh, I can't do that. And they'll just poo-poo emotion. They'll literally be dead inside probably. They can't build meaningful relationships. They're just going to go from woman to woman, really. And honestly, I think a lot of them can also, it can really result in long-term singleness for some of these guys because they're simply unable to build healthy relationships with people, even with family or with other women. And like I said, many of them are not even willing to like do something as simple as watch a chick flick or hold their girlfriend's purse. Like, Lord forbid. You know, they're very sensitive about their sexuality usually because they are afraid of this part of themselves that is vulnerable and soft and open to different things There are these gamer types who are so focused on parsing and hyper competitive, and they're really focused on proving themselves through doing this hardcore content, like the immersion Andes and all of that. And a lot of these gamer types, these, major parser types who are in an unhealthy state. Now, I'm not saying all parsers are unhealthy. What I'm suggesting is there is a type of male gamer that often over focuses on achievement in games. And part of it is because they literally are tying their value into doing things, into being logical, into just taking risks or pushing the envelope. And what they don't realize is that actual value and actual love of the self and self-awareness is going to happen when they start embracing things that make them feel uncomfortable. And some of those things might involve their emotions, might involve being monogamous, might involve having control of themselves, of maybe giving themselves to another person, whoever that other person might be. So once again, we have this relationship with the anima. You can give into it and basically become a bitch, or you can repress it and become an asshole. And this can happen to men, okay? And it can also happen to women. So let's look at the animus. So the animus, just like the anima, is part of the female psyche, okay? This is the inner personality of masculinity that every woman has the potential to grow, okay? In a healthy state, the animus is linked to risk-taking, autonomy, aggression, and logic. There is this sense of making my own decisions, standing up for myself. So just like the male who's connected to his femininity becomes more spiritual and open-minded and more open to creating relationships and, becoming a dad and things like that, the female who opens herself to the animus is going to become strong. But this does not mean that she's going to become a stone cold bitch, right? She's going to become a capable person who can take care of herself in a healthy kind of way. And this is not always easy for women to achieve this. In the same way, it's not easy for a man to achieve his anima. So if an animus is displaced, okay, so if, let's say, the woman is giving into her animus, okay, so let's say she's totally crazy, she's going to be bullying, she's going to be sadistic, she's going to be controlling, she's going to be bossy, she's going to be loud, she's going to be over-opinionated, overactive, right? Aggressive. Basically, all of the girl bosses that we have come to hate in the films are, in my opinion, poorly expressed, strong women. And what happens is, I think a lot of women mistake being an asshole for being strong, right? And I think men make that situation worse by also confusing that. So women are going to look at assholes and be like, oh, that's a strong man, right? That's what we get with 50 Shades of Grey. We get someone who's literally unable to recognize that a male in her life is actually really not good and is behaving in a toxic kind of way. I guess in some senses, Anastasia does transform Christian Grey. There is a kind of Beauty and the Beast trope going on there, but overall, there's a lot of alarm bells, and part of it, I think, is women these days are unable to really understand what healthy masculinity looks like, and therefore, when a woman gives into her animus, she is going to behave like the worst type of male out there. Okay. And it's just really not great. And there are quiet versions of this displaced animus. I'm actually technically in this category. This is where I would place myself. Now, I'm not a very loud person IRL. I'm very quietly controlling, I suppose. But yeah, I definitely have a very intense side. And I think part of my journey has been to return to my femininity, return to me being a woman and accepting those parts of myself that are more sensitive and are more emotional. Now, what happens if you are scared of your animus? What happens if you don't want to admit to having an animus? So you got some women who are scared of all things men, and they basically become like pillow princesses, in the worst kind of way, like fainting couch feminists. So they end up having this horrific doormat behavior where they can't even make up their mind about anything. They're passive aggressive, they're neurotic and fearful, they're always victimized, nobody understands them. They're moody, they're emotionally incontinent, so that means like they're always like on some kind of an emotional roller coaster. They cannot stabilize themselves. Some of these women will cling to people in their lives, or they'll sacrifice themselves for the people that they love. But is it really for the people's sake, or is it because it makes them feel good? I wonder. So, this kind of manipulation as well, this emotional manipulation that can happen. And, I think Jordan Peterson had it right once when he said that we can recognize toxic masculinity like 100 miles off, right? We see it, we know it. But what about toxic femininity? What is that all about? And that's why Jordan Peterson often talks about the devouring mother. That's an example. But there are other archetypes that I believe von Franz talked about it in Man and His Symbol. But basically, there are different negative, examples of toxic femininity. And some of them, it's really about social and emotional manipulation. And so if you are really scared of what a man is, or that masculine parts of you in your psyche, if you're afraid of that and you repress the heck out of your animus, you're going to be a really moody bitch. Because in your attempt to avoid the assholery that you are imagining will happen, you basically end up becoming a whole other kind of demon. Now, of course, like I said before, it doesn't have to be this way, right? You don't have to give in or repress your anima or your animus. There is a middle ground, and the middle ground is really a movement toward moderation and balance. So just like in the Yinyang Symbol, just like the mountain that shifts with the sun passing overhead, we should never imagine ourselves as being simply one or the other. An integrated animus and an integrated anima are really the end goals for any person. So an integrated anima within a man will allow the man to basically take care of himself, recognize his value, and give himself time and space to explore his feelings in a healthy kind of way. A man who is connected to his anima is going to be very creative, and he's going to harness his risk-taking to push the boundaries of creativity. Generally, if men have their anima aligned correctly, they will have a strong inner life. They will be empathetic. They'll have this connection to society, this bond, right? There's going to be relatedness. They're going to be able to make value judgments that aren't just based on logic or rationality. They're not going to try to min-max the joy of life out of everything. Like they're going to accept that some things aren't going to make sense, and that there's a beauty in the irrational and the mysterious as much as there is beauty in logic and order. So in general, I think there's a lot to be embraced by integrating your anima into your psyche if you are a man. And what about a woman? What's that going to look like for her? Well, if a woman integrates her animus, she's going to actually value rationality and logic. Instead of just going with her emotions and allowing her reality to be dictated by what she's feeling in the moment, she's going to learn how to step back and get perspective on things. She's going to be more objective, and she will also become creatively inspired because she's going to be able to drive herself and take risks. In many ways, women struggle with going with the flow. I think there's a biological imperative behind that. And basically, a lot of women are struggling with feeling like they're standing out, or they're the weird one, or they're the odd one out. And so a lot of women will often say yes to things that they don't agree with. Well, by integrating their animus, they're able to say no sometimes. And this will lead them to solve problems on their own. They're not going to need their hand held, and they can truly become autonomous and independent in a very positive, healthy kind of way. So there's a lot to be celebrated when we see a man or a woman integrating their anima or their animus throughout their life. So now that we've talked about that, let's just do a little wrap up here. So in short, depending on our personal growth, how we experience being men or women may change and vacillate over time. So sometimes if you're a person who's going through a tough period in life, you might find yourself either repressing or giving into your anima or animus. And sometimes you're going to realize that you are divergent compared to other men or women. Maybe you are more naturally masculine as a woman, or you're naturally more feminine as a man. Well, good news. You don't need to freak out. This doesn't mean that you're not a man or not a woman. It just means you're a little bit different. Your experience with life is going to be a little different. How you integrate your anima and your animus is going to be a bit different. And also you have to recognize that if you are, displacing or repressing your anima or your animus, it's not the end of the world. You are probably going through a rough patch in your life. You're probably going through some kind of stress. And the reality is that we will all have to learn how to manage ourselves and give ourselves space to bounce back from stress points or grow as people. I also want to note that the anima and the animus is a very helpful trope within literature. I think literature often undervalues, literary departments nowadays undervalue the Jungian psychoanalytical approach. Now, Jung may be out of favor with psychologists and sociologists, but I still think he has a lot to say that is helpful for how we can evaluate literature. Because in literature, as a literature analyst, we need to be able to chart literary themes. We need to analyze how characters grow and what kind of impact that growth might have on the plot. We need to understand what direction they're growing in. And we need to be able to compare and contrast characters, sometimes within a book or sometimes with books that are external to the book that we're analyzing. So we could compare, for example, Shang-Chi to Naruto, or we could compare characters within Naruto or within Shang-Chi. So when it comes to discussing characters or powerful universal tropes, I think having archetypes like what Jung created with his students and with his school of thought is very, very helpful, because we can actually weigh what is trending within our society in terms of these tropes. What is becoming more popular within, let's say, the romantic genre? What is becoming more popular within the film and video game genre? Why are people crying when they're playing certain video games or watching certain movies? Is it just the way it is, or is something else happening on a psychological, almost spiritual, emotional, and literary level that we can actually break down and analyze? Is there something there that we can actually analyze? And my answer is yes. And Anima Animus is a framework that allows us to analyze why these things are happening within the audiences. Now, I'm not here to make sociological statements or to make psychological or therapeutic statements. I'm not a wellness channel. What I am is a literary student who's interested in, why am I crying during this video or this movie or this TV show? And why am I not over here? And it's a really weird question, I suppose, to ask, right? Because should we be only judging something based on whether, Chieko is crying? No, but because of who I am as a person, I recognize usually if I'm being emotionally stirred in an aesthetic way, not in a I'm moody and I'm having PMS kind of way, but there's an aesthetic feeling that you can actually experience. Don't know if you've experienced it. Let me know down in the comment section below if you've had this experience before, where you understand that what you are experiencing is something more than what it appears to be at face value. And this can result in moments of awe or sublime, almost like terror, but it's like an elevated fear or awe. And sometimes it's emotion, like sadness or happiness, like a deep joy. And I don't feel emotions on a regular basis the same way that I think a lot of other women feel. I certainly don't express it all the time, or I don't know that I'm expressing it all the time. It's a very weird situation over here, but And so when I start feeling something aesthetically in response to something that I've seen, I start wondering, what is happening? Why am I responding this way when I wasn't feeling like that 5 minutes ago? And this is where I think my self-analysis has driven partially my literary analysis. It has caused me to really consider what is very powerful within literature, what is moving me to this point where I am feeling a certain way in this moment. And so I do really want to dig more into Anima and Animus, and hopefully everyone here will be along for the ride. Finally, I want to end with a little bit of a question. Jung isn't popular in literary studies. Why aren't his ideas about the Anima and Animus being proliferated as a way to read literary works? Once again, you can come to me and tell me, Jung isn't really considered, reliable for psychology or sociology. I mean, that's not my field of study, right? I'm a literary student. Why aren't we looking at works through the lens of archetypes? Why aren't we getting at least a basic archetypes class in your standard public education university course? Like even a mention, like even just like, for this one lecture, we're just going to cover some basic concepts of tropes and motifs and archetypes. Why is there zero conversation right now about Jung? Is it because Jung is too hard? Possible. Is it because Jung is too mystical? I don't think so. Because, there's a lot of flim-flam going on right now in literary studies. I don't see why Jung and his mysticism should be an issue. Right? Or is it because when we look at the path to individuation, to growth as a character, and we look at the Anima and Animus, and we recognize that this growth can be achieved in our lifetime. Once again, as I stated before, perhaps it's because Jung was all about personal responsibility. And also, if we think about it, Jung's conceptualization of masculinity and femininity allows for difference, healthy difference. And so that there should be no person out there who's feeling like, I'm not a woman because I feel like I'm a man. Well, maybe you are currently experiencing a moment in your life where your animus is maybe overinflated. And this is just where you're at right now. And you can work on that. it's a psychological problem. So I don't really want to get into some of the social stuff that's going on right now, but I'm sure a lot of you might know of certain movements that are happening where people who might have mental health issues are not being treated as such, and instead are being offered band-aid solutions because their problem is basically a profitable opportunity, an opportunity for profits. And there are people making money off of mentally ill people who are really asking for help. And so once again, I really think that the reason why we aren't talking about the anima and the animus in literary studies, when we're talking about everything else, we're talking about inhumane slaughter of pigs, we're talking about plastic in the ocean, we're talking about the ethical viability of abortion. We're talking about transhumanism. We're talking about the fringes of biomechanical engineering. So many topics that I think many of us would not really have the right to be talking about. But anyway, this is literary studies. This is where we're here right now. And yet we're not talking about the archetypes. So I really think there is some kind of ideological block that is disallowing individuals from accessing what I think is a helpful framework to conceive of masculinity and femininity and the swing between the both. And at the same time, I think literary studies is basically ignoring a very helpful framework for us to evaluate certain experiences that we have when we are encountering meaningful entertainment. So this is going to be where I end. Thank you for listening. Thank you everyone for subscribing. I just hit 500. Yay! Which means I can actually monetize now. Don't know how that will happen. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. But if you think that I should pursue anything, I might look into doing like some kind of member badge. I don't know. I'm really new to all of this. I just want to focus on creating content first and make sure everyone has a repertoire to watch on a bi-weekly basis, and just get into talking about literature and writing with me. I'm very interested in reading comment sections. I appreciate people who watch the whole video instead of just commenting, which is, I think, an endemic situation across social media as a whole, right? But I just want to thank everyone who has been tuning in and listening and just encouraging me a lot. And I look forward to hearing from everyone in the coming weeks as I put out more material. So let me know down in the comments below if you ever heard of Anima or Animus. And what do you think about this whole idea, and where would you apply this? What literature or books or films have you seen recently that could be read through this particular framework? Okay, well, that's about it for today. So, take care, everyone. I'll see you around next time.